Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
When we bought our place in this so-called vacation paradise, it felt like we were making a smart investment. The area was known for its stunning views, seasonal attractions, and a steady flow of tourists eager to rent homes for a week or two. It was a hotspot for short-term rentals, STRs, and I figured having a property in a community like this was a win-win. We could enjoy the place ourselves and rent it out when we were using it. It seemed like a no-brainer, but that's before the HOA decided to pull one of the most underhanded stunts I've ever experienced. It started quietly, too quietly. Nothing about it stood out at first, and that's probably how they wanted it. I didn't hear a single word about any meetings or votes. No emails, no announcements, no newsletters, just silence. Then, one day, the news trickled out like some ugly little secret. The HOA had passed a new rule. From now on, any newly deeded property in our community would be prohibited from being used as a short-term rental. Just like that, without warning, discussion, or even the faintest hint of transparency. I heard about it through a neighbor. She'd been chatting with someone from the board and casually dropped it into conversation, like it was no big deal. "Oh, didn't you hear?" she said, sipping her iced tea. They decided to put a limit on STRs. No new buyers can rent their properties out short-term anymore. I guess they think it'll cut down on noise and traffic or whatever. I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Wait, what? When did this happen?" "Oh, a few weeks ago," she said, like she was telling me about a bake sale. "The board voted on it during their meeting." "Didn't you get the notice?" "No, I didn't get the notice." No one I knew had gotten any notice. And that's when the realization hit. They'd done this behind everyone's back. The implications were massive. For one, it absolutely tanked the appeal of buying a home here. A community that allows short-term rentals is a huge draw for vacationers and investors. The demand drives up property values. And, honestly, it's part of what made buying here attractive in the first place. Now, anyone looking to purchase a home would have to consider this new restriction. It'd drive prices down, plain and simple. And for what? Because a handful of people on the board decided it suited vision for the neighborhood? I'll admit, I was furious, not just at the rule itself, but at the complete lack of respect they'd shown for the rest of us. We're all property owners here. Shouldn't we get a say in decisions that directly affect our investments? Apparently, the board didn't think so. I confronted one of the board members about it the next time I saw him. His name was Greg, a smug, self-important guy who always seemed to think he knew what was best for everyone else. He was out watering his lawn, acting like nothing was amiss. "Hey, Greg," I said, trying to keep my tone civil. "I heard about the new rule on short-term rentals. What's going on with that?" He glanced at me, his face a mix of feigned surprise and condescension. "Oh, that. It's just a measure we put in place to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood." "Preserve the integrity?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What about preserving our property values? Or giving the owners a chance to vote on something that affects all of us?" He shrugged, still holding his hose. "Not everyone's a fan of short-term rentals. Some of us have had issues with noise, strangers coming and going, things like that. We thought it was best to limit them." "Thought it was best," I shot back. "And how many people were actually involved in making this decision?" 5? 6? Out of how many homeowners?" Greg's smug smile didn't falter. "The board has the authority to make decisions like this. It's in the bylaws." I wanted to scream. "Just because you doesn't mean you. Do you have any idea how many people this affects?" He shrugged again. "It'll blow over. People will adjust." That was it. That was his answer. People would adjust. Like we're supposed to just roll over and accept whatever the board decides to shove down our throats. Word spread quickly after that. The more people found out, the angrier they got. Our little neighborhood was buzzing with heated conversations, hushed complaints, and outright yelling matches. People started digging through the bylaws, trying to figure out if there was a way to challenge the rule. But, of course, the board had covered their bases. The rule was technically legal, which only added to the frustration. I went to the next board meeting, along with half the neighborhood. The room was packed, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. People were pissed, and they weren't shy about letting the board know it. "How dare you make a decision like this without consulting the rest of us?" one woman shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "You're supposed to represent, not just yourselves. This is going to destroy property values," another man added. "Do you even care about that?" The board members sat there, stone-faced, as the complaints poured in. "Greg," of course, took it upon himself to respond. "We understand your concerns," he said, his tone oozing fake sincerity. "But this decision was made with the best interests of the community in mind. We're trying to create a neighborhood where people feel comfortable and secure." "Comfortable and secure?" I snapped. "You mean comfortable and secure for the 5 of you sitting up there? This wasn't about the community. This was about your personal preferences." Greg's smile faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "We're not here to debate the rule tonight. The decision has already been made." The room erupted into chaos. People shouted over each other, demanding answers, demanding a reversal. But the board just sat there, unmoved. They had the power, and they knew it. They didn't care what we thought. As the meeting dragged on, it became painfully clear that nothing was going to change. The board had made up their minds, and they weren't about to back down. They sat there with smug expressions, deflecting every question or concern as though it was beneath them. Every plea for fairness or reconsideration of the rule was brushed off with vague, noncommittal answers that only added to the frustration in the room. People started shifting in their seats, the tension growing thicker with each passing minute. By the time the meeting finally adjourned, the atmosphere was heavy with defeat. Small groups gathered in the parking lot, their voices low but filled with anger. Some talked about hiring lawyers, others about organizing a recall, but the exhaustion was evident. You could see it in their faces as they exchanged bitter remarks about how the board had hijacked the community for their own interests. Deep down, though, there was an unspoken understanding that this was going to be a long, uphill battle, and the board wasn't going to make it easy. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the neighborhood only grew. Some people talked about selling their homes, unwilling to put up with the board's overreach. Others started organizing, trying to rally enough support to force a vote or, at the very least, replace the current board members. But progress was slow, and the board continued to dig in their heels. Every time I saw Greg, it took everything in me not to confront him again. He'd strut around the neighborhood like he owned the place, completely oblivious to the damage he'd caused. Or maybe he wasn't oblivious. Maybe he just didn't care. One day, I ran into another neighbor, a guy named Tom who'd been one of the most vocal opponents of the new rule. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "How's it going?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tom sighed heavily. "Not great. We're trying to get enough signatures to force a special meeting, but a lot of people are scared to rock the boat. They don't want to risk getting on the board's bad side." "That's ridiculous," I said, shaking my head, my voice rising with frustration. "They're supposed to represent us, not make decisions behind our backs like some kind of dictatorship. This is our community. They work for us, not the other way around." Tom let out a bitter laugh and crossed his arms. "Yeah, well, good luck convincing them of that. Greg's been strutting around like he owns the place. He's been going door to door, telling anyone who will listen that the rule is final and there's nothing we can do about it. Like it's set in stone or something?" I scoffed, feeling a surge of anger. "Of course he is. That guy acts like he's the king of the neighborhood. What the hell does he even know about what's best for everyone? Did he forget that we're the ones who voted him in?" Tom shrugged, his expression dark. "Doesn't seem to matter. He's made it pretty clear he doesn't care what we think. It's all about what he and his little clique on the board want. And if you ask me, they're banking on us just giving up." It was infuriating. The board was supposed to represent the interests of the community, but they were acting like dictators, passing rules that suited their own agendas and daring anyone to challenge them. And the worst part was, they might actually get away with it. As of now, the rule still stands. The board hasn't budged, and the community is more divided than ever. Some people have given up, resigned to living under the board's thumb. Others are still fighting, clinging to the hope that they can force a change. But for now, the board has all the power, and they're not letting go of it anytime soon. Every time I look at our house, I feel a pang of regret. What was supposed to be a dream investment has turned into a nightmare, all because a handful of people decided their opinions mattered more than everyone else's. And the worst part is, they're probably sitting in their homes right now, congratulating themselves on a job well done, completely oblivious to the damage they've done to this community. The HOA board's silent rule change had pushed the community into a whirlwind of tension and outrage. For months, the resistance grew stronger, fueled by endless meetings in living rooms, late-night strategy calls, and grassroots efforts to organize homeowners. Flyers were distributed, emails circulated, and every owner was urged to stand up against the current board's overreach. The pivotal moment came when a group of homeowners discovered an obscure clause in the HOA's bylaws that allowed for a special election to replace board members if enough signatures were gathered. The board fought tooth and nail to suppress this effort, claiming procedural errors and attempting to discredit the organizers. They even hired a lawyer to send threatening letters to the most vocal challengers. But the homeowners were relentless. They pooled resources, sought their own legal advice, and made sure every step they took was by the book. When the petition was finally submitted, the board tried to invalidate it, citing technicalities. But the homeowners weren't backing down. After a heated town hall meeting, where tempers flared, accusations flew, and some board members stormed out, it was decided that the election would go forward. The campaign leading up to the vote was nothing short of chaotic. The current board plastered the community with their own propaganda, painting the challengers as reckless and unqualified. Meanwhile, the opposition exposed every shady decision the board had made, including the STR rule and other self-serving policies. The community was more divided than ever, but one thing was clear: everyone was showing up to vote. The election day finally arrived. Tensions ran high as neighbors who had barely spoken in years debated outside the polling station. When the votes were counted, it wasn't a landslide, but the results hinted at a major shift. The old board hadn't been entirely ousted yet, but they had clearly lost their majority hold. The new board members, a mix of STR supporters and transparency advocates, promised to revisit the controversial rule and prioritize homeowner input moving forward. While the fight wasn't entirely over, the tides were turning. The old board's grip was slipping, and the community finally had a glimmer of hope that their voices might start to matter again. For now, it was a small victory, but it felt like the beginning of something bigger. Ours did a complete rental ban unless the house has been owner-occupied for 2 years to keep the vultures out. I couldn't be happier. The shitbirds who want to turn every house into a rental to extract as much as they want from us instead of letting us accrue our own wealth are furious. Half a dozen of the hundreds of houses in our neighborhood ended up in the hands of vultures intent on sopping up every house in the subdivision, and it stopped their plans dead in their tracks. STR-friendly does not necessarily attract more buyers. It depends on the community and its location. In some areas, STR-friendly will make it harder to attract buyers. Unless your covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, give the board authority to restrict rentals, they have no authority to do this without a vote of the owners. Whether or not STRs are good or bad for property values is debatable but also irrelevant. The only question is whether or not the board has authority to pass such a rule.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.